ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening, Molweni, Sanbonani, any language I've left out, I greet you all. COVID-19 did not just take loved ones, our colleagues and comrades. It took away a sense of security. Okay? People woke up one day, and that sense of security, families, households, was taken away. But in particular for black women, Malaika or Azania painfully points out that they are never allowed to be tired. Black women are never allowed to be tired. In fact, I'll go as far as saying women are never allowed to be tired. I quote her, she says, our pain as black women is politicized. We're expected to be superhuman, and this is a hemorrhaging experience for black African women. Okay. Speaking about her experiences as a born free, she cites out socioeconomic complexities that her peers face on a daily basis. And what are those? Issues around black tax, issues around racism, lack of resources, gender-based violence, sexism in the workplace, sexism at school, and so on. Mahlati grew up in Soweto. She was born in 1991. She was born in post-apartheid South Africa. She attended her schooling in Melville, and at school she sat out a very important event where she was publicly victimized. And she was publicly victimized by her teachers because at some stage her mom was in no position to pay school fees. Her mother was in no position to pay her fees. And of course, teachers in our schools would cite out that you're not getting your report card because your mom hasn't paid fees. Okay? So this lifelong trauma shapes her relationship with money. This lifelong trauma shapes her relationship with school and with money, education and money. The childhood victimization of being poor at school shapes her relationship with education and money. Poverty is humiliating, it's degrading, it covers you in shame, Mahlati commented. Born Malaika Lesego Mahlati in October 1991, Malaika is a writer, political commentator, a blogger, and a television presenter. She's a womanist and published her first book, Memoirs of a Born Free, a book that documents her grandmother's life, her mother's life, and finally her own. She holds a master's degree in science from Rhodes University and various other universities in South Africa. I want to take this opportunity, by the way, my name is Louis Montana. I am the Deputy Headmaster of St. Andrews College. I want to take this opportunity to welcome the different schools that are here, in particular, to welcome, I'll tell you now, to welcome Apiwe. I think she's Deputy Head Girl at Kingswood, and to welcome Erin, the new crew from DSG, and I think our Deputy Head Boy is here as well. Welcome with your crew. And most importantly, my four talented young men will provide insight on this book, on this write-up by Malaika of Azania. On my left is Lamlani, Ayomide, Woody, Aiden, and Alex. Those two are coming in my history class, so they're quite clever, they're quite sharp, so you can enjoy it. Welcome and enjoy it, please. We'll allow them to present, we'll give them a few minutes to present what they've uncovered in the book, and then we'll have a Q&A session and a general discussion around very topical issues in our schools, very topical issues in our country. So ladies and gentlemen, enjoy yourself and welcome.
Good evening to everybody in the crowd, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to quickly open the floor with a quick introduction to the book. So everybody talks about the born-free generation, but few actually listen to them. The generation that was born during the post-apartheid era are commonly referred to as born-frees. They're believed to be incredibly lucky in the fact that they never had to suffer at the hands of the National Party or be a part of the constitutional racism faced by their predecessors. But Malaika paints us a picture of what it is really like to be considered a born free, to be born into this free generation. And whilst racism may not be a legal requirement in our constitution anymore, South Africans are still living in a structure that is ravaged by institutional disparity. Malaika is using her gifts and writing ability to forcefully interrogate the problematic notion of the rainbow nation narrative, and by daring to address a broken promise of the ANC, she reveals just how inadequate political freedom is without socioeconomic freedom is. So tonight we're going to be exploring 4 main themes, those being the institutionalized racism within the workplace and our schools, the dangers of conservatism, childhood struggles due to the mismanagement of the ANC, and finally the institutionalized disparity within cultural changes and moving from place to place. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker tonight, Lamlani, and he's going to speak on to our first theme. Apologies, sorry, Aiden was going to speak first.
You can sit if you want to. Maybe the mask just for the benefit of the
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to be elaborating on the main overarching themes of the first half of the book, as well as going through into the story of Malaika's transition from township schools into Model C schools, and the institutionalized racism she experienced through this transition. Okay, so we start off the chapter with her reflecting on her time attending the ANC Youth League gatherings. So first, we hear her talking about the impact of her and her uncle's death, and how that impacted her as a person, and how that impacted the rest of her family. So, first of all, her grandmother thought that it was muti, which is a sort of sickness that she thought, okay, no, I'm going to go become a Sangoma so I can stop this from spreading to the rest of my family. And then her mother, now since her grandmother had gone and to become a Sangoma, she now had to take the role of leading her family, since her family was a matriarchy, and now she had to go and lead her family while being the breadwinner of the family and being involved in the ANC Youth League. Okay, so, and next what we experience in the book is how they were evicted from their home, which is an RDP, which is one of the brick houses built in townships to help underprivileged people to get a better home for themselves instead of living in shacks. They were forced to move out of this RDP, and they were forced to move back into Swakiri Street, which is their old street where they used to have a shack, because they couldn't no longer pay for the funds to go to the RDP house. So after this, about a few weeks later, on one afternoon, they go and they come back to their house and they find that it's completely flooded. Since shacks don't have much structural integrity, there was many leaks, and since heavy rains hit, all of their belongings were completely flooded. School books, mattresses, everything that they had was completely wet. So, and I think this just highlights how people in townships really don't have the greatest life. I think we all understand this, but I don't think many people grasp how prevalent this really is. Because you don't have to ever worry about coming home and seeing all your possessions gone, or coming home and thinking, oh, since these rains have occurred, are all of my belongings going to be destroyed by the rain? And I just think this is something that we really have to tackle with the book, about privilege v no privilege, and how that affected her education and her development. And so after this, her mom found a job as a communications support officer in the South African National Non-Governmental Organisation Coalition, or for short, SANGOCO. And Malaika, as she was young, she always attended her mother's ANC Youth League gatherings, and she continued to do so. But during these gatherings, she really didn't understand what they were saying during the discussions. She was there to sing the songs of the martyrs, but she didn't understand that yet. So I think this is really a reflection of how she didn't understand the problems and institutional racism back when she was young, but as she would go through her education, she would slowly realize how prevalent this was in affecting her life. And so And near the end of the chapter, we get to see how instead of singing songs that are joyous, they're actually singing songs about martyrs that have died for the ANC Youth League and their cause, and the liberation of South Africa. And I think this really goes to show how much they really cared, and the ANC Youth League cared about the struggle that they were facing. That they were singing songs to praise these martyrs that have died for their cause. And so now we skip to the next chapter where she starts attending Mill Park, and she immediately realizes the differences in between the township schools and the Model C schools. So, first of all, I'd like to start off saying that in the township schools, there was barely any facilities. So it was just a school, teachers, there was no real facilities for them to be able to expand and develop as people. It was more school, teachers, that's it. But she realized that as soon as she got to Model C schools, there was many more facilities, there was many more computers for them to be able to engage with the internet and become competent workers in the workplace. And I think this really emphasizes the institutional racism that has been displayed, as soon as apartheid ended, the education system didn't really change all that much in the townships. The schools remained the same, but the Model C schools that were hours away from the townships, that didn't really allow people within the townships to go there and get education, since it was so draining for them. As Mr. Matatu explained in his speech, the black tax, and how it's expensive to be poor. And what I mean by this is how they went and they had to pay for their bus ride for 2 hours, when many white people who went to the same Model C schools only had to drive 10 minutes to get there. And I think this really, it's a snowball effect really, how they went and they had to, and even though they're the poorest people going to this school, they have to pay the most to be able to get their education there. So I thought I would just like to highlight that, and how many people in South Africa throughout their lives, and this is constantly reinstated through Malaika's mum, that it is hard for people to make it out of the struggle of poverty and the poverty cycle going through that looms in the townships. And what I mean by this is how there's a cycle of poverty within townships that is hard for many black people to escape from, since, as I've just explained, the black tax sort of prevents them from doing so. So her mum would always encourage her to keep up her studies, keep up her education, so that she can make it out of this cycle that her mum herself experienced. And Malaika also feels like she isn't meant to be at the school. During the first 3 days that she was there, she thought that she didn't belong, since there weren't many black people at the school, even though it was meant to be a very, very diverse school for their time and a multiracial school. She felt like she was the only one like her there, such as, and I'm going to quote her here, and black people who did go to school describes what they have become coconuts. So what she means by this is how they become so they are physically black in appearance, but when it comes to their insides, they've been indoctrinated into this white culture, and she describes that they have lost their heritage in one form or another, and that she didn't really feel like she belonged there because she still kept roots to her heritage, even though they themselves have lost their roots. And I would just like to go again about the privilege, the no privilege that she constantly emphasizes throughout this book, and how being close to school, the having to get in a bus for 2 hours just to go to school, and how this has costs much more money to do so instead of the white people who get to only drive 10 minutes to school and they're finished, and how this really affects their education due to the fact that they get much less sleep, they get much less time to do their homework. So when they go to school the next day, they have to wake up early, sleep deprived, and still try and beat the white people there so that they can get a good education and try and make it into top universities. And she discusses her love for books in the next chapter, and how she really came to understand her love for literature, especially English literature. And I think this is one of the many things that drove her towards becoming an activist author. And how she sees such privileged people, how people in the township see her as being much more privileged than they. But when you go out of the townships, you realize that she's much less privileged than any of the people there. So I think that really goes to emphasize how much of a difference there is within the people in the townships and the white people attending the Model C schools, how much of an imbalance of wealth there is between these two parties. And how there's a sense of elitism within Yawa. And something that she says is that this feeling of elitism is amplified by 10 times when she goes to the only white theatre, or what she describes as only white, since she was the only black person there. And how they'll do such plays as Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, but they would never take the chance to acknowledge struggles of South Africans, indigenous South Africans, and the real stories about African characters and struggles. And I believe that this is another emphasization of institutional racism, and how they'll only focus on white stories instead of focusing on the indigenous stories of African people. And one of the key points that sparked her activism was the World Children's Prize for Rights of the Child, that she always used to read the articles that were presented there by the Sangoku company that her mother worked for, and how she sees other children struggling in similar positions to her, but how they managed to overcome these and fight for their cause. And I really believe that this is one of the things that helped her become an activist later in her life. And how she explains that township schools don't have computers, so they're destined to become incompetent in the workplace. I really think this is also just something it's just something that we can't allow, that people who we say must be trying and giving the opportunities that's similar to ours, but yet they don't have the facilities to do so. So when they want to try and apply for the same jobs as many of us who are very privileged at this point, they don't have the necessary skills because they weren't educated with them, since they had to go to township schools instead of going to Model C schools. And she also points out here how the ANC has forgotten about land and education, and that was the main reason for the creation of the ANC. And how they wanted to abolish the Bantu education system, and how they wanted land, the equal amount of land for black people, but they completely forgot about the education side of this, and how they failed to educate people in the townships, even though that was one of their main priorities. How they forgot about this, and that's how they failed. And when she moved to Bloemfontein, how she witnessed a man stealing, and how he actually got burnt alive by the community. So I personally believe that this is something quite disturbing for a young child to watch, because as a young child you don't really want to see somebody getting burnt alive, but unfortunately they had to resort to these kind of things because there was no police station in Bloemfontein, and only by police coming over from Dobsonville, which only happened hours later, or they would never even arrive. So they had to take matters into their own hands as civilians to try and sort out the problem of crime within their community. And I really think this is something that also emphasizes the institutional racism in how there was no police station in Bloemfontein, where many black middle-class people were, and how they were forced to deal with their own problems when in Dobsonville there was a police station there, and they would barely ever come to when they called. And I would just like to finish off here with her progression from a child not understanding anything to having to provide for her family at the age of 16, which many of us are over the age of. So whenever she and Lumumba, her younger brother, got money, they would spend it on Lumumba, and because they wanted him to not have to feel the humiliation of poverty. And they would always buy him clothes, they would always buy him food, so that he didn't have to feel this sense and humiliation of poverty. And how she started selling assignments at school and started a sweet business because she needed to help pay for her bus journey home and her education and pay for groceries to put food on the table. And I think this is very taxing on somebody of our age to having to juggle education, 2-hour bus drive there and back, that would be extremely taxing on them, and having to write essays for other students just so you can get money to have food on the table on that night. And how any spare money would go to buy chicken drumsticks for Lumumba, because Malaika and her mum would get the rations from what the people in the township called Malabos, which is the feeding scheme that they had set place in the township. And how they'll always get money. Whenever they had extra money, they'll go and spend it on meat for Lulumba, so he still didn't have to feel that sense of poverty. And when Malaika's mum fell ill with depression, I mean, not depression yet, but when she started to feel ill and how she started not really believing in the ANC so much, and she was, while Malaika was studying for grade 11 exams, to study for nuclear physics, which is a very hard course to get into at Stellenbosch, and how this is extremely emotionally taxing on her as well, with her mother falling ill, so she couldn't really do the job to the best of her ability, so she also had to provide even more while trying to study nuclear physics, while trying to get into nuclear physics at a top university. And how her mom lost her job, even though she had been hospitalized for depression, and how the company wasn't really willing to give her a job back, and when her mom did take it to court, they came back fighting strong. So she eventually had to drop the case because she couldn't afford it anymore. And Malaika also explains in the book how this is also another factor of institutionalized racism, in how when the ANC went over to take over from the National Party, they didn't really change any of the legal laws, so it still left the monopolized organizations to be able to completely bulldoze anybody else in court. And I feel like this is really something that the ANC failed to address when they transitioned from apartheid to a free country, and how black people, impoverished black people, can't fight for their own rights since big white elitist companies completely bulldoze them in legal court. And I think that summarizes the first part of the book.
I'd like to thank Aiden for what he said. I would like to just summarize my point of view of this book in 3 points, and that is inequality of opportunity and wealth, struggles in Morrissey School, and the failures of the ANC. Firstly, inequality of opportunity.
Can I ask you to drop your mask just to make sure that it's never Yeah, it's not that it's the country effect.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Inequality in wealth angered Malaika. All her peers had expensive jewelry, had fancy phones, had fancy food, while she ate bologna. But while in the township, she was considered privileged. Though apartheid ended, effects of apartheid still lingered. People in townships are not exposed to the same opportunities as those that live in the cities. This lack of exposure keeps the status quo of apartheid, confining black people to the slums and the white people to wealth. This disparity in wealth is reminiscent of the apartheid times. Malaika states this phenomenon as walking into a foreign land in her own country. Slavery cannot be considered a rainbow nation if opportunities are not exposed to everyone. Secondly, the struggles in the model C schools. There is an obvious struggle for previous model C schools to assimilate to the new post-apartheid South Africa. Malaika described it as a living nightmare. She struggled to make new friends and was marginalized by strict hair rules, in which she was not allowed to wear her natural dreadlocks, in which the school considered untidy, to the norm of ponytails, relaxed hair, and small buns. These rules did not fit the type of hair that Malaika had. This standard made her feel uncomfortable in her own skin, as her peers looked at her and laughed at her. Though it was a privilege to go to model C school, it was very little. It was not a large privilege in an emotionally taxing environment. Some model C schools are still designed for white people, with rules that marginalize other races. And finally, the failures of the ANC. The ANC have not prioritized critical matters in South Africa, critical matters such as education. There is a glaring difference in infrastructure from previous model C schools and township schools. In township schools, students barely use computers and thus will be incompetent in workplaces. This current system will not produce any critical thinkers, rather students who will graduate and serve the system in such an unequal way. This, fundamentally, is the same to apartheid. The ANC, rather than the movement, gave apartheid its place.
Okay, so now we're going to continue our story in November of 2009, when Malaika wrote her final matric exams. And even after the previous struggles of the matric year, she managed to achieve the highest mark for English in her entire district, as well as getting into her first choice university, Stellenbosch. So it's with high hopes and many dreams that Malaika is going to go off to Stellenbosch University to study laser and theoretical physics. Unfortunately though, her excitement is going to be short-lived, which I'm going to explain now. This also brings me to my main theme that I'm going to explore today, which are the dangers of conservatism and an overly conservative environment. I'm going to give two opposite examples that Malaika experiences during her years at the university, and then open a broader discussion about the conservative nature of many South Africans. The Stellenbosch area has a demography that is highly dominated by conservative content. And so it was very early on in her university career that Malaika was first exposed to the dangers of this conservative nature. So while attending a party just before the academic year began, Malaika, and in her own words, felt the magnitude of the contempt that Afrikaans people have for us, contempt that can be expressed in as minute as a gesture or a glance, end quote. She goes on to explain how she and other black students were subjected to microaggressions and entirely marginalized by their peers throughout the night. This experience was also not isolated, and after only a few weeks at Stellenbosch, Malaika left and went on to join a black consciousness movement in Grahamstown called Blackwash, with the aim of being able to rewrite the black narrative. She found a home in this. In the abyss that was left by the ANC. Shortly after joining Blackwash, she was asked to join a project called the September National Nucleus, or for short SNI, which was an organization focused on bringing sustainable change and development for the majority. The issues that they aimed to tackle were education, poverty, racism, landlessness, sexism, as well as attempting to combat xenophobia within South Africa. The anti-xenophobia campaign was the first that Malaika would participate in, and they focused on having protests against areas where most crimes against foreigners happened. The first campaign took place in Mary Fitzgerald Square in Newtown, Johannesburg. There were over 100 people expected to come and participate in this protest, but it ended up being fewer than 15 people that arrived. Not to be discouraged, however, Malaika and three of her colleagues went to the no taxi rank and to hand out pamphlets to preach these anti-xenophobic messages and engage with people on the issues that they were trying to raise. Many people were receiving to this, and a few stopped to even help in campaign, but there was not everybody. Not everyone shared the same beliefs, and this incident brings me to my second point on conservatism. So while they were handing out these pamphlets at the taxi rank, a group of 3 armed men dragged Malaika and her colleagues up to a room near the taxi rank and interrogated them for hours. They confiscated their pamphlets, they threatened their lives, and this was all for the mere act of campaigning against xenophobic act, from trying to protect other Africans from the violence that they faced just being inside of our country. And this is the type of conservatism that I'm talking about. This conservatism is similar to the first example I gave, where people just refuse to understand the situations of others. So where people make a conscious decision to make other lives uncomfortable. And I'm going to emphasize conscious decision, because it's when you make the conscious decision to make someone's life worse than it already is, or uncomfortable, that is when there's a problem. So that's where the danger in conservatism lies. The conservatism is not defined by one race or particular ethnicity. Anybody can share conservative views, and this means that anybody can be responsible for actions brought upon their extreme end of the spectrum. But I'm not here to preach anti-conservative messages. My only goal is to make people aware of the effect that their words and people's actions have on others. As Malaika explains throughout her book, it's often the smallest of actions that can completely change a person's viewpoint on others and themselves. To truly achieve the Rainbow Nation narrative that we so dearly want in all South Africans, we all worked and strived so hard for so many years of struggle. We must all be aware on how we affect others and the dangers of conservatism, how we affect others through the smallest actions in our lives. That is how we're going to truly achieve this Rainbow Nation narrative. Thank you very much.
Good evening to everyone, and I thank all my fellow speakers. I think we have spoken well today. I think they have really presented the story nicely. And I'm kind of going to be the person who's going to be opening the floor, and I'll be throwing around a couple of topics, but obviously from everything you've heard, there's a lot to ask about, there's a lot to really talk about in and amongst us, and hopefully a lot of constructive stuff. So in everything we've learned about the book, it would be very, very immature of us just to take it in, understand, and not do anything with it. I think it's our duty as the youth to do something about it. I think with Malaika giving us insight on how she lived, maybe we can see, we can draw insights on how she lived and how we are living in this age, and how things might have changed or how things might have not changed. So I'll be going on with a couple of topics, seeing how maybe some things haven't changed or maybe some things have changed, and just see how we can move on or how we can talk about it in and amongst us. So the first topic I have is crime. So Malaika's brother gets killed. His name was Godfrey. He gets killed in a police raid. They raid Malaika's house, and he was killed because he was a criminal. And he was a criminal, well, it later gets revealed in the story that he was a criminal because he had no other option. The apartheid system worked against black people. It didn't serve them, it only served the white population. So it begs the question of how do we determine if someone's justified to commit crime? I think that with him committing those crimes, being put in a corner of poverty and the systemic racism that was prevalent at that time, how do we justify a person stealing because they're in a poverty situation, they can't do anything else, or is the law just the law? And I'm going to open that question to the law floor.
It's quite a provocative question.
Yeah, well, I think people often in certain situations where they can't do anything, they commit crimes to survive. And I think during this time, there was extreme white privilege. Committing a crime, no matter who you are, it's wrong. And I think someone who committed a crime to be killed is just completely unnecessary. And in his situation, I don't like when he's speaking on the fact that he was killed for committing crime to survive. For me, it's like almost something that is reversed. If he never committed those crimes, he still would have died. So at the end of the day, police catching up onto him. At the end of the day, his time was death penalty. God.
I think that obviously it's easy to say that, yeah, crimes are crime now that we're not in that era of life, but we also have to come from a place of understanding that at that stage in life when you're like either just out of a party or during a party, if you were like not white, you were literally backed into a corner. Like you actively have a legal system that genuinely works against you in every sense. You literally can't win. You cannot win. And so because you cannot win, your only way of surviving is to do things that morally you wouldn't do, but you're forced to do because you have to survive. So not that it's justified, but just have to get that people's backs were literally faced against the wall, and it's not like they could move. It's like
I'd like to add to what you said. I'd like to bring this to institutionalized racism. And if you are living in a system that works against you, and in order for you to challenge the system, you have to commit crimes in order to get some money. We all know that crime is never justified, but I'd like to ask the question of, we never really ask people, we never look at the reasons why people commit crimes. Like right now people get punished and all of that, but it's like, how do we fix the problems that people have that make them commit crime? Yeah, makes sense.
Anyone else? Yeah, we are allowed to differ. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I think with regards to with regards to the law, right? When looking at the South African Constitution, right, it's important to note that the law in itself is not wrong, right? And I think it's an important thing to note that the law in itself is not wrong. The Constitution exists to protect the rights of all of the citizens of South Africa, right? We agree, right? I'm not seeing a lot of people agree with me. So, the problem that we normally face, and I think something that Malaika in her activism, in her writing, talks about a lot, is that the world is an unequal place. And that because of that unequal nature of the world, and it being filled with inequality, and all of these really ugly things, capitalism, classism, racism, all of these other things, and how all of these things intersect, we find a situation where crime becomes the only option, right? Because I do not have food, because I did not go to school. How am I going to go to school when I cannot buy my uniform for school, right? And it leads us to ask the question of, what exactly is going wrong in the system? Where exactly are the problems here? Why are people unemployed? Why is the unemployment rate so high, right? And I think her work asks us to ask the bigger questions at times, and to ask ourselves, is the South Africa we see today the one that we imagined? Is this the dream?
I actually wanted to ask a question because one of you said something about the Rainbow Nation, and I actually wanted to ask you guys if you guys still think that we can achieve that.
I think absolutely we should achieve it. I just think that it's harmful to consider us as we were saying earlier, it's harmful to consider us a rainbow nation currently if there's still institutionalized racism, if there's still people that don't have the same opportunities as others because of the color of their skin, because of where they're born, because of who they're born to. And then we really can't consider ourselves a rainbow nation if that still happens in our country. But I think if we work hard towards it, if every single person in this country works hard to achieve a common goal, as they did during apartheid, as so many people did to work to achieve a common goal, we can achieve a true rainbow nation. But it's not going to come easily, and it's not going to come while we still have issues like this in our schools and in our workplaces, especially not in the legal system.
I'm just elaborating on that. We can't, if we call ourselves truly a rainbow nation now, as we've been doing for the past 20 or so years, we don't really battle with all the problems that we do now, because the Rainbow Nation is a narrative that pushes that we are all equal as of now. So pushing that narrative makes us believe that we do not, everybody in this country is equal, when that is just simply not the case with the institutional racism still in place.
I think these young men are questioning the merits of our Constitution, okay? Our Constitution is brilliant, but our Constitution does not say anything about the history of South Africa. It does not echo enough, the fact that we come out of an unequal society, we come out of a society that has oppressed for the last 250 years. And I think the young men are saying, if we acknowledge that, if we're in a position to acknowledge the fact that South Africa comes out of an oppressed, historically oppressed society, we then can find solutions to build a country, to build a country. In fact, President Dr. de Klerk passed on today, and I think his foundation has released a message, a video message that he did a couple of weeks ago, where he's acknowledging the wrongs of apartheid, where he's apologizing to the people of South Africa for apartheid.
But wouldn't you technically say that we did acknowledge that with the TRC?
Sorry?
Wouldn't you technically say that we did acknowledge that we came from an oppressive system with the TRC, just wasn't executed properly?
Can I respond to that? As a history teacher, as a scholar of politics, I have a problem with the TRC.
I also do. No, say it. Me too.
Okay.
Me too. But I'm just saying, because you're saying that the Constitution needs to acknowledge what we came from and what we came through as a country and as a people. But technically speaking, if we're looking at the logistical side of it, TRC did that. But you still find that there's a lack of accountability in the country.
Yeah, the TRC seemed to address, the TRC lasted for 4 to 5 years. It seemed to address 200 years of oppression. Okay, the Nuremberg trials in Germany were addressing a problem of 15 years. They still continue today. The people were still getting arrested from crimes that were committed in the 1930s. So it tells you how seriously we took that restitution process as South Africa.
And I also think that when it comes to talking about the Rainbow Nation, you also have to give a definition, because the Rainbow Nation back then, they also had a different definition. They were imagining a Rainbow Nation of political and social freedom, but in the world we live in today, that's not really prevalent as such, because there are things that, there are injustices that hold certain races back, such as economic freedom or economic equality. And we also have to address those, because that generation and ours are fighting for similar but also different things. So we also have to kind of look at what we as the so-called born frees are fighting for and what our definition of the Rainbow Nation is.
So while you guys were reading the book, did you ask or did you wonder, or was it something that you grappled with? Now, there's lots of talk about C schools and township schools. Where did you feel yourself sit with regards to where you go to school?
Obviously, at a school such as St. Andrews and previous prep schools that most of us went to, they're even above those levels of privileges that the former Montesquieu schools would have. And so our schools aren't even considered in Malaika's book, because that's like a level of privilege that she couldn't even touch. That the level of poverty in South Africa has brought down so many people that only 1% of South Africans are actually free enough economically to be able to attend these schools. And so for Malaika to be a poverty-stricken girl, it's really not realistic that she'd be able to even speak about these schools. So we're so high on the end of privilege that it's not even spoken about in the book. And that's
But
really
my
sticks.
question is, how do you feel for not even being considered spoken about because of being so outside of those experiences, the possibility of experiences?
It just makes me feel very grateful that I never had to experience any of these struggles. I mean, reading what she has said and then comparing it to my own life, I never had to experience any of these things that she's gone through. And I'm of a similar age when she started talking about all these struggles she had to face in the book. So, you just can't begin to fathom what her life is like compared to what your life is like. So it made me feel extremely grateful, and just grateful just that I was born into such a privileged circumstance.
Just to go on what you said. Reading the book, I did a reflection on the privilege that I am to go to this school like this. And obviously it's difficult to say, to step in someone's shoes when you've never been there. So just a reflection, just to be aware that people do struggle and people do. So it made me almost uncomfortable that people had to struggle like this and I didn't. But I think that's just the sad reality of life, that some people are more unequal. But what we have to do as a nation is to try and bridge almost a gap, to try and make everyone partially equal, but they will, in some sense, be equality. But it did make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think on Eva's went there, just hearing you guys talk about the book, so my point of how I feel is that I actually feel sick inside to hear what they went through back then and what she went through back then. And it makes me also feel sick to see where I am today, and there's certain things I complain about in my daily life. And I think everyone in this room can say they complain about something in their daily life, where people back in the townships would not be complaining about the same thing. So it's really just opened me up to see and really second guess what I complain about and be more appreciative and more things I get and come to me in life more than what I did before.
Obviously with the author, my was part of the design and she wasn't. But at the same time, it's sort of like, with another thing she was saying, it's sort of like, oh, but me too. Like, I don't know if you guys get me, but it's sort of like, obviously we come from different worlds. She came from this background, I came from this one. But still, in the sense that she's black and she's woman, I can relate to her being in a school that technically isn't suited for her and isn't made for her. And so, yeah, I just thought it was like kind of relatable because like obviously I don't come from where she comes from and I'm very privileged to be where I am, but you'll still find the generational institutionalized racism even now because I can feel like exactly how she felt like in 1999.
I also had a similar experience, obviously not kind of relating to the experiences she went through as a black woman when it comes to the injustices she faced with people discriminating her based on their hair or the skin color at school, but I think I can relate to her experiences of being taken out of a township and just thrown in the deep end where you're in and amongst people who have been exposed to English and exposed to the level of education for a long time. And she couldn't really interact with a lot of people because she wasn't really exposed to much English. And to be honest, I felt the same because when I went to prep, the only private school I went to, it also felt I was getting thrown in the deep end because I was never really exposed to English in that manner. Even the school I previously went to, English wasn't really their main language. So I kind of related on that experience of, wow, it's surreal, and at the same time it's very hard for you to feel like you fit in when the school is kind of not meant for you. So I kind of think that was a similar experience.
Okay.
I listened to an interview by Malaika, and she was speaking of experiences at Stellenbosch and Rhodes. And it was very interesting that she felt at Stellenbosch, it was a white versus black kind of situation. It was, the racism was out there. But when she went to Rhodes, she faced more of a class issue. There were black people at Rhodes, but they had more money than her, so they fit better into like the school society and stuff. And I think that's something that we see in our schools and stuff, because in our schools we play sports with each other. There's different races in our sports teams and stuff, so it's like, how can we be racist if we're playing together and all of that? But not everybody is coming from the same financial situations. Like we have kids on scholarship and stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure that they find it very, I know some of my friends find it very difficult to be part of everybody else at the school because of like the classes that we have associated within our schools.
Yeah, if I can just make a comment. I haven't read the book, obviously, and just picking up from the conversation, I think she's raising quite a very important issues in the book. And I think if you think about it, I think she speaks quite a lot about the ANC. ANC was formed in 1912, and before 1912, there were other struggles that were sort of put by the traditional chiefs and various people up until 1912. And then the struggle carried on. In 1955, there was the adoption of the Freedom Charter, and then you carry on, and then you get to 1976, where there was the youth uprising and fighting the apartheid system, and ultimately in 1994, there was the freedom. Then I think where we are, so I would say that the struggle of oppression has been kind of a long journey up to, shall I say, 1994, where the freedom, the democracy was achieved in South Africa. But then, I think there were various other forms of discrimination, class, economic, and various other things, and education and those kind of things, which I think it poses and it raises a big challenge and a task that the born-frees are faced with. So that the born-frees, this generation, you guys have a huge responsibility. So if I give credit to the ANC and other freedom organizations up to a certain point, but then there were these kind of dimensions that now it's difficult to run properly, and then people like yourselves who were born free, who are in an integrated society, you have a huge challenge to bring those societies, because schools are microcosm of society. So you are integrated at school, but when you go back home, you go to parents and communities that are still fragmented. And suppose parents and other adults, they've got their views, and you are the people that have to raise the profile of bringing the communities together. And I think that is the challenge that all of you sitting here, you have. So what is it that, as a 40-year-old, as a 16-year-old, as a 20-year-old, as whatever, what is it? What contribution must I make in my community, in my society, to bring? And I think that's where we are.
It sounds like there's like really a little failure in that we have said this, we failed in the last 8 years to achieve that non-racial society, that anti-racist society that provides opportunities for everyone. I think that you are acknowledging that.
I do, because that's why I said this is the gap, and this is the challenge that the born-frees have to. Now you've got to rise. And maybe, and I'm not lambasting the adults and the grown-ups to say they are incapable, but in the last 27 years, there hasn't been much that has been brought up. So,
I find it quite interesting. Like I've been very privileged since I was born, but I did go to a school which is considered a township school, just to see those people. Like I've never experienced it. I never will, but just to see other people experiencing it, and then coming to Kingswood. One thing I've noticed, especially about St. Andrews, DSG, Kingswood, is that. Like, for instance, one thing we brought up, which is quite a big issue, is popping the bubble, if you want to say. So, for instance, it's such a prestige school and it's such a well-accomplished school, but like we're in Grahamstown and there's so little things, which I think this is why it's so important and crucial to have these conversations, is to kind of just acknowledge, it's sheltered, it's extremely sheltered. Like we're in Grahamstown, but I feel like very few of the Grahamstown schools, well, St. Andrews, DSG, Kingswood being the top schools, actually acknowledge the community we're in, and the people, it's just to see Kingswood, right next to Kingswood, there's one of a massive township, but Kingswood never, the people in Kingswood, which I feel like we can fix, and it's not difficult, you just need people to be on board, is to kind of acknowledge the people around you and to actually interact, which will end up leading to more of a rainbow nation if people actually pop this bubble and say, okay, let me take initiative and do this.
Intentionality in ending racism, in ending structural racism, it's really what she's good. Great points. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I think one of the big things as a younger generation that we need to do is that we can't keep quiet anymore. We need to be able to speak up. We have so many platforms where we can teach many people around the world. There's Instagram, there's Twitter, there's whatever you name it. And a lot of us are reading some things online. We're thinking in our heads and how we can express it to the world. but yet we still sit back and not doing it, where one comment can change everything. I was sitting with one of my mates and I said, how do you feel when, like, I first asked him, have you ever been racially abused? And he said, yes, he has. And I said, how did it make you feel afterwards? And he just said, it almost felt normal. And he said, at the same time, it felt like how his parents felt. And for that, it was a big change in my life as well, seeing that. And whenever, personally, I hear something racial or anything, I try to step in as much as I can to try changing it. I think as a younger generation, we can't keep quiet anymore, like I said. We need to be able to address it, we need to speak about it more. Like these talks within schools, throughout communities need to happen so people are more aware of what is really going on and nobody's too scared to speak up. Yeah, that's mainly my point, is really being able to speak up and not being scared anymore and hiding in the shadow. You need to bring yourself out to the closet and really speak.
I mean, I think absolutely. It's always going to start with the youth. Throughout the struggle, almost everywhere in the world, the youth have been a part of the struggle. They've been part, especially in South Africa, they've been a part of the struggle for so many years, and youth are often turning points in these struggles. And so if we want to truly achieve the narrative, if we really want to achieve a truly united South Africa, it has to start with the youth. It starts with talks like these. It starts with changing stuff within our schools. There's institutionalized racism still in South African schools, and if we change that within the schools, and then move that into the communities, and finally the entire country, that's how we're going to truly achieve the Rainbow Nation. But it's going to start with the youth, it's going to start with us, it's going to start with everyone here, and we really need to work hard to a common goal if we really want to achieve this. Is there any other questions?
I think we'll take one or two comments and then we'll wrap up.
I'm like off on that point, like off. Because even like, obviously you always have people who do the right thing, but then you'll have people who don't. It's either they don't or they just don't listen. So you'll have that. Also, another issue is that historically the schools we are at don't like that. We are in a private school, obviously there's institutional racism, everyone knows that, but they don't want to acknowledge that. They don't want everyone else to see that they have it. So that's a main issue, because as soon as students start speaking up, it's kind of like, whoa, chill out, or it's ineffective disciplinary. That's an issue that's faced by a lot of people. So there's either the school or there's just people who won't listen to you at all.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, that's what I tried to talk about with my points about conservatism, about people that just choose not to listen and choose to still hurt other people. But I'm hoping that in South Africa, and especially in our schools, that we can change that into the minority, and that as a country, as a school, as a whole community, we can change it, we can still change it, because even if there are those people, and there will always be those people, we can still change the narrative for the majority, because that's what's really important. And we have to face those issues in the school head on. I mean, the first place we have to start is school. If there's an issue with how the schools run, especially pertaining to institutionalized racism, we really have to attack that in the schools head on, because that's the only way that we're going to change our communities.
Fascinating stuff, yes, yeah.
So I feel like we always mentioning, having conversation, and I think that's something that we do. We always have conversations, we always speak about the problems. We all acknowledge the problems that we have, but when we speak of solutions, what are we speaking of exactly? I don't think speaking is enough anymore. We all know how to speak. We all know this is wrong, this is right. But what solutions are we speaking of when we say solutions?
Solutions, young people, solutions. Let's hear solutions. Yeah. And we're reporting to headmasters tomorrow. Solutions. Let's go. Let's hear. Let's come up with 5 solutions that we can take. Yes.
Ooh, I don't know if I should launch my school. So I was thinking, like, it's just an idea that's in my head, but like I should probably introduce this to my school first. But maybe we could create like sort of like societies within our school. So like the LGBTQ plus society, the Black Power society, just societies of people who have been like historically marginalized, so they can have safe spaces to speak about these things. When they'll obviously be representative in a student, obviously like a prefect body, they in one of those spaces that belongs to one of those spaces, and to create that safe space, no person who doesn't belong to that space should be there in the first place. And so, what if we create like societies within our schools and just that.
Alex, I hope you're taking down notes. Societies. Right.
I think, that's definitely a good way to start inside the schools especially. And like I said, if we want to attack these, we have to start with the schools. And so I hope that you guys get that in Kingswood. I'm going to make sure that we get it at St. Andrews and DSG. So,
Change from the times of Metternich in the 1830s in Italy, change was effected by young people. The Arab Spring was brought about by young people. 1976 revolution in South Africa was effected by young people. It is young people giving fees must fall any form of revolution in the world, except in China.
So I went through my high school in the late 80s, early 90s. That's where, and we used to have what we call a mekhabulo. So a mekhabulo were sort of gatherings where we kind of pump each other with what is the state at the time when I was in high school. ANC, for example, was still banned, so we wouldn't know what's happening. The South African government, the Nationalist Party government, pumped media with propaganda and all those kind of things. So we would have people who would smuggle information and just give information so that we know what's happening in Namibia, what's happening in the borders. South Africa in exile, in Zambia. So we got. So I think. So I'm sort of aligning myself with your points of so that kind of giving each other information, relevant information that will empower everyone.
Okay, we'll take two comments. Student activism, echoed by Mr. Binyana. Yes, sir?
Yes, sir. I was thinking another solution that you could do is, I know at St. Andrews we have on a Friday week we have CD cult. And I think it could be optional where you could have talks like these and educate people, or especially in the school, educate people on what is really going on in the world so they can actually take that knowledge. They get, if they feel something from it, they can go out back home and they can spread that word through. And I think that's where a lot of change can happen within the youth and also with schools. Just by small talks like these can really affect something and be a bigger change.
Okay, maybe a charter out of our schools, a transformation charter, diversity and inclusive charter from our schools, especially our leading schools in Grahamstown, including township schools, needs to come through sometime next year, where we all agree on certain principles on issues of equality, on issues of anti-racism, and on issues of actually reaching out and responding to immediate communities. So somebody mentioned that. We're going to take 2-3 points and then we have to close. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I also think more acknowledgement of people's heritage. So for instance, for most schools, I think the only time we see people's heritage is on Heritage Day, where people wear their heritage outfits, and that's it. Like, we don't ever get taught about different heritages. People don't speak about their own heritages. Like, it's so shoved aside until it's Heritage Day, then everyone's like, okay, wear your heritage clothing. But I just think learning about it more in like the school syllabus maybe would also help.
So I'd like to add on to his point. I'd like to add on to his point. As a border, I feel very isolated to what's happening around me in this country, and I'd really like, I don't have any specifics, but I'd enjoy it if I could get more exposure to the the struggles in South Africa, what's happening in South Africa. I feel very isolated. It's just like school, sports, studying, friends. I feel very isolated. So if the schools could help with exposure to really what's the reality of South Africa, I'd really enjoy that.
The reality of South Africa, exposing us to the reality of South Africa. Okay, great points, yeah.
Just to expand on both your points, I think that this can be implemented with, as you spoke about, Heritage Day being the one day of the year where we get to truly express our heritage and learn about each other's heritage. Maybe you could try and implement in the IB syllabus or national specific syllabus in LO, because LO, as most of us like I've already realized, we don't really do that much in LO at the moment. So maybe by implementing learning about everybody's heritages and South African culture, maybe that can help us understand more people's backgrounds and where they're coming from.
Okay, great points. I'm going to ask one adult in the room just to give us a few words of inspiration, and then I'm going to ask Hugo to come forward and just close your remarks, and then we can have Peter and interact for a few minutes, and then actually build ties between us to make sure that this is not the last discussion, that we can take it forward, and I hope the next one will take place in Omulelo or somewhere in the country. Okay? One brave adult. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm facing my back towards.
I think it's really nice that we're having chats like this. And like you said, we can't keep talking about it forever and ever and ever and ever. Sometimes we have to actually start talking about solutions. And I'm actually really, really, really inspired by some of the solutions you guys also put up. Because at the end of the day, this is going to make me sound very old, right? But we are leaving the world to you. You know, it's very important that you guys also understand that this is your world, this is your reality, and that you also have agency within your own realities, right? And I think it's really inspiring. I think that, you know, our panelists today have done a great job. It's a long book. It's a very long book. So thank you very much for you guys for also doing it. And thank you very much to everyone who decided to also mention a point. I had some really eye-opening experiences myself, hearing, you know, your perspectives. Because as adults, we'd like to think we know what's going on with you guys, right? But we don't always know everything, right? And we'd like to think we know you guys, right? But you don't know yourself. But no one knows you better than you know yourself, right? So don't feel discouraged. Sometimes, you know, it's hard work. Transformation and diversity, as they say, is hard work. It's not easy work, right? And it's important to be gentle on yourself also. Never forget that. Be gentle on yourself, be kind. Always move with kindness. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out. Before I do so, I'd also like to raise my claim to fame. I was also once in Mr. Matata's history class grade 9. But like Mr. Matata said, most change starts with youth. We've seen it right through history. I'd like to thank everyone who's come out today. It really shows that there's something growing within our schools, and we really have something within us to come and make it happen. So look at everyone in the room. Change starts here, and it starts now. And enough talking. We've been talking for 27 years plus. It's about time we stepped up and did actions. And that's exactly what we need to see entering 2022. I mean, 3 grade 9s, 4 grade 9s, and guys are laying the foundation for the junior boys as well. I mean, it's lovely to see, and going forward, I think it's a lovely side. And I'm excited for us to have. Thank you very much for everyone coming. thank you so much for your eloquent questions.
Thank you so much for coming out. I hope it's not the last time. Please help yourself to some chairs and enjoy.